learning is a very recently coined term. In fact, it came into limelight since 2012 NIPS conference, the Neural Information Processing Conference, where there were several special sessions on this. And now it is said that whatever terms related to pattern recognition or machine learning you have heard about, which are related to data engineering and data analytics, all these terms are ultimately now coalesced together, and the future is deep learning along with big data, both together. I hope all of you have heard about big data, isn't that? It's a very recent thing. Now, already in the previous keynote lecture, you have heard some innovative applications about machine learning. But deep learning is really about mimicking the human brain system in its closest form. Human brain is composed of what? What are the fundamental perception units in human brain? These are neurons. And already the artificial neural network is a very established domain of computational intelligence. It is there for last more than 50 years if we start from the McCulloch-Pitts neuron. So what is new in deep learning? Deep learning, how it actually resolves the different complications of human brain. That is what I will try to give you just as sample or glimpses of those facts. In fact, large-scale machine learning is the future of all pattern recognition research that are being undertaken these days. I started actually taking an interest into deep learning while working on a project in collaboration with IIT Kanpur. And the project was very peculiar. The project was like they were trying to set up question-answer machine, answering machines in different villages of UP, Uttar Pradesh, where there are farmers. They will have various questions regarding their agricultural state of art or agricultural technology. Then they come to those, and there are 4 or 5 villages together in a center, and there will be an answering machine for each such center, agricultural technology solution center or something. And the expectation is the farmers will come there, ask the questions in their own mother tongue, that means in their own native language, and the machine will answer and solve their queries, right? They cannot type in keyboard, they cannot read English, okay? The actual dream of computer science is what? The actual dream of computer science is when computers are operated by using natural language. That's why there is so much research dedicated to text processing, natural language, manifestation and things like that. Now, till date, to operate a computer, do we can we use natural language? The answer is no. We have to use C, C++, Java, etc. Then, the interface between human natural language and computer is machine learning, basically. And then, when we come to such a scenario where there may be, there were at least 12 to 13 various local native languages, and we have to collect language samples from all such farmers. Then we have to train a system which could identify the speaker's native tongue and which could then react back in the same native language. So this whole system, this whole learning process is mimicking the human brain at its finest level, because we actually do so. Now, I will not go into what is all these learning stand for, like what is supervised learning. Learning, actually, what is a learning system? A learning system is one which can take decision based on its prior experience, right? And supervised learning is when there is a teacher, when there are labels to every data, and you are collected from a part of the universe of discourse, and you are showing those labels and teaching a classifier that this is cat, this is dog, this is rat, like that. So in absence of any, so obviously 2 things we can do. One is regression, which is one aspect of supervised learning, and another one is classification, which is the other aspect. Classification have many various applications like handwritten classification and so on. Similarly, unsupervised learning, where we try to identify 2 things. The first one is whether there are naturally occurring groups inside the data, and the second one is whether the data resides in a low dimensional manifold. That means we can represent the data with some smaller number of attributes, right? And the unsupervised learning is very important in context to large scale, big machine learning. Take an example, when we search something in Google till date, from 2006 to now, Google has become somewhat intelligent. I won't say it's become very intelligent. But when we search some term in Google, it doesn't show us a tree-like hierarchical fashion. It could have done something like when I search the term Madonna in Google, suppose I'm a Roman Catholic Christian. So I search the term Madonna because I want to know about Virgin Mary and her divine graces. What Google shows me, for the first 1 or 2 or 3 pages, it shows me the filmography, discography, scandals and blah blah stuff, the famous pop star Madonna. Probably after 3 pages I will find some entry related to Virgin Mary or Black Pilgrimage. So we did an experiment long back actually. We tried for unsupervised clustering of the web pages downloaded by Google. It has a crawler, it downloads lots of 10,000 HTML, raw HTML texts. And we performed a kind of clustering operation on those web pages, and we could immediately see, after the clustering was over, we could immediately see it gives us 3 categories. And each category is represented. We didn't know what these categories stand for. Then, because it was unsupervised, no one was there to tell me that this category represents that. So after the classification or clustering was over, we could see the first biggest cluster is recognized by key terms like filmography, award, discography, etc. about pop star Madonna. The second medium-sized cluster belonged to keywords like Black Pilgrimage, Virgin Mary, Joseph of Nazareth, blah blah stuff, which are all related to Virgin Mary and her divine graces. And there was the third cluster, which even I couldn't think of. That was characterized by keywords like Michelangelo, artwork, Italy, museum, and things like that. That was related to the famous artwork of Michelangelo, whose name is also Madonna. So Google could have done like this. Google could tell me that, look, against your search term Madonna, we have found these 3 categories. Now tell us which category you want to view in details. Till date, Google doesn't do that. And why we couldn't sell our product to Google? Because it was very slow. The problem is, whenever you are going to use normal machine learning techniques to such huge scenarios, the time it takes is more than, in our case, it was nearly 4 hours. So you give a search term and wait for 4 hours to get the results. No one will use your search engine. That was a minus point. But that's the importance of unsupervised learning. Similarly, email filtering is also an example where unsupervised learning is used. You have to distinguish between spam emails and normal emails. Anyway. So I am going to skip all these things because these are already taken care of by the previous speaker. Sometimes learning the associations is very, very important, especially in web-based recommender systems where we use either Bayesian association rules or sometimes fuzzy association rules are there. And market-based transactions, like people who are buying bread will also buy milk. Or people who are buying bread, diaper, beers, eggs. So these products are kind of associated. So if someone searches for any such product, then probably it is meaningful in e-commerce to show him or her the advertisement for some other product. So someone is buying milk, so show him some product related to eggs or breads or something. This phenomena comes into web-based recommender system as well, where we have this kind of stuff. So you probably have seen this interface, this Amazon interface. So when you search for a book, somehow that book's theme is associated with the other related books, and it is shown that people who have bought this book, suppose it's Trevor Hestiu is the most cited author in machine learning. If it is his book, then the person who is buying this probably is also interested in buying Christopher Bishop's book, or Duda's book, or Ian and Wilkins' book, etc. So this is called a recommender system based on association rules. But in large scale, when we do this across various e-commerce websites, this data size can be terribly high. So in these situations, we go for deep learning architectures, and this is the virtuous cycle of AI. AI, based on AI or artificial intelligence, some product is launched in the market. That product may start from a very small scale, then the users of the product are building, and the user of the market is becoming very huge. Then based on those users, data is being generated, and the data is fed back into the AI for improving the product. When Facebook was launched, do you remember, before Facebook there was another social networking website, I don't know whether you have used it, it's called Orkut. You can remember Orkut. Then Orkut merged with something, but when Orkut is the name of the person who launched it. He was a student basically. So when he launched it and when he was going away with it, dealing with it, he actually, he never thought that it will become to that scale. Then Facebook was there. Facebook gradually, multiplied its number of users, and from those users, lots of data came. Sometimes, still till date, one biggest problem before Mark Zuckerberg is to find out the duplicate profiles. Sometimes he says Facebook has 1 million users now, 1 billion users now, but you never know. 20 profiles may belong to one person, 20 fake profiles may be there. So there is no technique for that. So anyway, Facebook provided a lot of data. Those data were sometimes handed over to different other companies which can use them, which can market their products. So in fact, Google does the same thing. If I search in Google for some t-shirts, then the next day I can receive some emails from some t-shirt companies who are trying to promote those t-shirts. So Google is actually giving away their data. Based on data, those web-based recommender systems, they are auto-generating emails and we are getting those emails. Most of them go to our spam folder anyway. So this is the tendency of machine learning. If the amount of data increases, the performance of modern machine learning algorithms usually go like this. However, deep learning methods that we are talking about in here, their performance scales up like this. They won't saturate. Even with as much as data you can supply, they go like this. Now, what is deep learning? Things that we want to do with data, we can have data in various forms. We can have images, we want to label the image. If we have audio, we need to recognize who is speaking and what is the content of the speech. If we have text, we can do web search, etc., etc. So, computer vision, why normal computer vision without machine learning is difficult? What is the mode of computer vision? There is a picture, we have to identify the coffee mug. This can be a very typical computer vision problem. There is a bed of patients in an ICU and there are cameras mounted on. You have to identify in which bed a patient is having an erratic movement. At night there is no human watcher. So if that bed patient has an erratic movement, that means probably the patient is undergoing a stroke, a heart attack. Then immediately you have to call the doctor. So now, but the problem is what the computer sees. The camera sees all, the image is actually represented as pixels. You know pixels? The image is a two-dimensional array comprising of all these numbers. So from all these numbers, that's what the computer does. It manipulates numbers. But can there be any way by which we can go for concept learning? Concept learning means, can we incorporate the concept of a mug, or the concept of a face, or the concept of a cat inside the computer, the way our brain sees things? We do not, in our brain, the actual processing is so very beautiful that we do not look into the lower levels. When I see a picture, do I really see the top left corner has 162 pixel beside that something? Do I see a matrix or do I see the image itself? I always see the image itself. So basically in computer vision what we do, to classify a coffee mug, we extract the features and then we feed them into a learning algorithm. And features for machine learning can be done in a various way. Images, like from image you can take the vision based features like SIFT or SCC. Then you can detect the actual thing. From audio, you can take the audio features and find the speaker's ID. From text, you can find the parser tree and then go for web search. However, building these high-level features or extracting the correct features is the fundamental tone of any machine learning application. And our brain does that in a remarkably strong way. That's why we did not bother about it. And all our brain does is it can very accurately classify one class of objects from another class. When I look at your face, I am seeing a face. There is a concept of face formed in my visual cortex. If you have, any one of you have gone through neurocognition models or neurocognition kind of subjects, you should know that our visual cortex is full of neurons. These neurons are small cells which are connected with each other through small, very weak electrical impulses. And these neurons actually build up the concept of a face. That's called conceptual learning. How many neurons are there? Much greater than billions, maybe of the order of trillions. And when we do neural networking, how many ANNs we connect on a machine? Probably, I mean, the very big network may have 1,000 or 10,000 connections. So it is not possible for the classical artificial neural networks to mimic the human brain. And the fundamental learning strength of human brain is through connections among various neurons. How many connections are there? Trillions and trillions of connections. We cannot imagine. So why speech recognition is hard? Microphone is recording some message like this. Please find the coffee mug. Then the vision-based task is I say to the computer, please find me the coffee mug from the picture. And I feed a picture into the computer. Then the computer encircles the coffee mug. This system is actually really very tough to design. But nowadays, people do this with the help of human-like learning. Because think of the reverse situation. You are given a picture comprising a coffee mug somewhere on a kitchen table. And your friend says, hey, please locate me the coffee mug. What would you do? You take a pen and just encircle the coffee. You don't require lots of algorithms or lots of research for doing that. You are already engineered to do that. Engineered by the Almighty, probably. So, the idea is most perception or input processing in the brain may be due to just one learning algorithm. You need not have multiple learning cycles. So build the learning algorithms that mimic the brain. Most of human intelligence can be done due to one learning algorithm. We have one basic cognition and learning algorithm that is active in the visual cortex. And when we take the visual sensory units inside our eye, actually we form various shapes by using the various connections of trillions of neurons inside the brain. So that is the main architecture. And we actually learn different higher level features. We do not learn pixels. When we see some object, when we see some face, say Professor Joshi's face or Anindya's face, when I see his face, and then after 1 year I again see him, I immediately recognize him. So because in my brain, within the connections of the neurons, each connection has an electrical voltage strength. That's like weight of the neuron, of the link. So based on those links, I somehow store some high-level features of his face, like his mustache, or his hair color, etc., or his talking style. So I can distinctly remember all those things, and 1 year after when I see him, how are you, etc., it happens. So we remember, so natural progression in machine, if you want to do in modern days, whatever machine learning technique was there prior to deep learning, those techniques were dependent on this strategy. They would learn from pixels, then edges. But the second and third layer, they won't go for. If you look at the third layer, these are the faces. Then if you look at the second layer, these are the object parts, which mostly human beings realize or recognize in faces. When we see a face, we recognize whether the nose is very big like me, or whether the eyebrows are very thick or not, whether the mustache is very thick. These are the parts of the face that human beings realize and memorize. So these parts, when put on the concept of a face, which is an abstract concept built up from various such parts, and that's the average of these things. That's called a sparse coding of the face. and then we have the concept of a face on top of which we put different features which are tagged with the name of the person, like Anindoda. He has a mustache, very good mustache, or broad forehead. When we put these things on the concept of the face that is already there inside our mind, if that concept is gone, that concept is formed by the interconnection of neurons in visual cortex. If we lose it, we cannot at all identify any face. That can happen when we are injured over here. जोर से लग गया, उसके बाद I cannot remember whether this is a face or this is a lorry or this is something chair. I cannot recognize it. That happens when the connection is lost, and when the connection is lost, that can be due to damage of your brain. So how about mimicking that? Neurons in brain are like that. Artificial neural networks are like this. I think I have 10 minutes or 5 minutes more probably. So you all know about artificial neural network probably. This is a very well-established model. Neurons are connected. These are the connections actually, and through these connections, what pass? Small electric current can pass. And artificial neural networks, this is a very primitive model, only a single perceptron. These are the weights of the links. They control the strength of the signal through each link. And these inputs are basically the features of an object. And this is a transfer function which formulates the weighted sum of these features. Finally, at the output, we can have a binary output, like either the object belongs to some one class or the other class. That's the output of a perceptron model. Rosenblatt's perceptron model. Then there were connection of perceptron models. Then there were, lot of problems regarding the model. In 1980s, there was a paper by Minsky and Papert. They were Russian scientists. They wrote a paper that neural networks cannot classify XOR problem, exclusive OR problem, where we require more than one perceptron to classify them. Then neural network field was almost dead for some time. Then there came a few people who resurrected the field, and among which there was a very famous scientist from University of Toronto. His name is Geoffrey Hinton. Geoffrey Hinton is a very famous name. He is very active, and at last of this lecture I will show you links to his YouTube video, where he is the father of, one of the fathers of deep learning movement. He, along with Ian LeCun and along with Vladimir Vapnik. Have you heard the name of Vapnik? Vapnik is the father of support vector machines. Support vector machine you must have heard of. Some of you should have heard of. So interestingly, all these three people are now with Facebook, and they are doing a lot of research to make Facebook more profitable company. That's one part, and the other part is to make use of deep learning in various cognitive architecture like Google Brain, Google Eye, etc., etc. Andrew Young is also there. Andrew Young is from Stanford University, but he works for Baidu. That's another concern. So what is exactly deep learning? Why it is generally better than other methods? Short answers are like that. Deep learning means using a neural network with several layers of nodes between the input and output. In normal neural networks, we have an input layer, we have an output layer, and we have only one hidden layer. In case of deep neural networks, the number of hidden layers can be very, very high. And the higher it is, the better is the learning capability, because hidden layers will have lots of connections among them. They will have tons of weights associated with them. That is why training the deep learning, when you are going to train the deep neural network, when you are going to train them, that means you are going to manage 1 million weights in different epochs of the learning phase. That creates a data of, that amount of data can easily surpass gigabytes, that goes to terabytes range. So training phase of deep learning is related to big data management actually, because the data you cannot really store in any normal hard disk, you have to have large cluster of machines. So the series of layers between input and output do feature identification, and they process through a series of stages just as our brain seem to. So the basic philosophy is create lots of connections among the artificial neural networks. Whatever is there, make it very large scale and put lot of hidden layers so that through various nonlinear paths, various higher level features can be represented and learned. So multi-layer neural network have been around for 25 years or more, because this 25 years is from the origin of backpropagation learning. So we have always had good algorithms for training the weights with one hidden layer. But these algorithms, when we go for deep neural network, a very small instance of which has been shown over here, these algorithms are not at all good for learning weights for networks with so many hidden layers. So we require algorithms for training such several hidden layer neural architectures. And the idea of unsupervised feature learning, why intermediate features are important for difficult classification tasks, is very important. So sometimes in your for training such deep architectures, we use semi-supervised data set. Are you familiar with semi-supervised learning? Where the number of labeled data is very small, in the training set. That by using semi-supervised learning, the network is made robust against false alarms or false classifications. Okay. Because you are giving the network enough chance to think and conceptualize. So now we stand here, 0 to 2 years of tagged data, next, then 3 to 5 years of tagged and untagged data, after which the deep learning field can be said to have reached a stage of maturity. Supervised learning is like that. We have cars and motorcycles in the picture, and someone says, what is this? You have to identify that this is another car, just like this. This is not a motorcycle. If you identify it as a motorcycle, that means your learning cycle must have several faults in it. Semi-supervised learning is unlabeled images. All are cars or motorcycles. Then there is a car and there is a motorcycle. And you have to identify what is it. And these are all unlabeled images. There is a car. You have to find the closest approximation of this car inside the images and identify them as cars. Similarly, you have to find the closest approximation of these motorcycles to this labeled data or the labeled image of motorcycle. So you see, inside this training set, only 2 are labeled, rest of them are unlabeled. That actually increases the robustness of the process and reduces the false alarm rate. Then there comes a query image. This is your testing phase. And you have to identify whether it is a motorcycle or a car. Deep learning is most suitably used for semi-supervised processes. And then there can be self-taught learning. I mean, unlabeled images, they can be randomly taken from the internet. 2 labeled images, car and motorcycle. Inside the training set, it is your duty to say that none of these images belong to these 2 classes. That's another kind of, that's called negative example learning. So you are learning by, actually eliminating the false examples. Then you are testing what is this, what does it stand for. I'm not going to the detail of this. Deep learning with autoencoder. Autoencoder is a special scheme for deep learning, especially in image reconstruction phase. These are the 4 very important architectures. You can have the details of them. Since I don't have time, I'm not going into the deep of deep learning. So supervised learning, again, what is this? You have to identify from, because these features are not much related. If you go for on a pixel basis, you cannot actually match. You have to remember some higher level features based on which you can infer that this is also a coffee mug. Bigger is better. Usually the performance of the neural network along with various unsupervised learning techniques. If the size is going big and big, then the performance usually goes big and big. That's a very important experiment. We see that the neural architecture is it of a very high size, then the classification error rate is going to be smaller and smaller. So this is a picture of Google Brain. Actually, it has 16,000 CPUs inside, and they are interconnected. And they say it has more than 1 million connections of neural nodes, because 16,000 CPUs are there, they're working in parallel. Using these 1 million connections and after so many research, it can form the basic visual intelligence of a cat. Cats are there. Cats have their visual cortex region. And if we look, there has been several experiments headed by Geoffrey Hinton and also Dr. Vedanta Shuru, who is sitting in MIT. So he is the head of some media labs over there, and they have collaborated to see how this Google Brain is close to a living entity's brain. And the living entity is only a cat. It's far away from human brain, because human brains can do even subtle things, more subtle things than the cats can do. So building huge neural networks, we go for 10 million connections to 1 billion, then there from 10 billion, and like that. For that, sometimes we use GPUs or graphic processor units. Actually, whenever we all work in computer science, in Indian context, whenever we write for a project, they say, "Aapka paisa ka zarurat kya hai? You are working in computer science, so you can easily have a PC and pen and paper and do research." I had that particular notion with me till 2014. Then after starting to work in this area, I could realize I really required huge amount of hardware because normal processors cannot handle this kind of deep neural network learning programs. So previously I was doing research with computational intelligence, soft computing, etc. Then gradually I started to import these techniques for deep learning. And then I could realize my hard disk is not sufficient to support all the intermediate weight values because the number of weights is very huge, it's going towards trillions. So in Indian context, people should actually start working in deep learning and write good projects to the funding institutes. Now they can ask for cluster of computers or good GPUs which will cost you around 8 to 10 lakh rupees per machine. In fact, if I work with IIT Kanpur, they have their machines, they have a clustered center for computing, but those clusters are not also sufficient. But one of my friends, their collaborators there in NTU Singapore, they use a 48-core machine, and that machine is quite fast for training up to 10 hidden layers of deep neural architectures. Sometimes learning from data, tag data is like that. I mean, older algorithms saturate, deep learning goes on. Still we are here, so it's in the linear stage and far from saturation. Some applications are like speech recognition. Modern days, all mobile phones have a voice command recognition system. They are built based on the deep learning, pre-trained deep learning autoencoders. Similarly, image search, you take the picture of any beautiful spot of Lavasa, put that picture in either Google image search or Baidu image search, then it does content-based retrieval. This content-based retrieval is a hugely complicated task, but it does in very small amount of time, and it can show you which places of India you have been to or which other places are very similar to your query image. Web search is already becoming more intelligent, but it's still far from becoming that intelligent level, as I told you in the first example. Similarly, image queries can be there, like clothing, bags. I see, someone, Professor Joshi is wearing a beautiful shirt, so I take a picture of that shirt and post it in Google image search. Then it is done by Baidu. All these are Chinese names you can see. So it immediately shows me which companies are selling that kind of shirt, which companies are giving discount, etc. So
what is the percentage of accuracy in that kind of
in these image search techniques? The gross percentage of accuracy is still around 60%.
That high?
That high, yes. Now it's because and it also depends on 60% on the basis of the fact that the resolution and contrast for your query image must be above a threshold. If your query image is not that clear, then the accuracy will drop down. But the backbone of all these techniques are deep neural architectures, which are being learned and set into motion to do all these things. I mean, you see that you give an image and it gives you the result in 2 minutes, or in 20 seconds maybe. It can take 20 seconds for slow connection. But in the backbone, there is a pre-trained deep neural architecture, which is dedicatedly trained for doing this. So it can find out. This is like some human being is pre-trained for a special purpose. Have you heard about the tea testers who can test a tea and immediately infer about how good it is, etc., the degree of goodness? So those people are specially trained. Their olfactory nerves are specially convolved to do that.
But in this case, is it like a conventional search engine where the crawler has already created this the database?
Yes. I mean the database is already there. There is a huge database.
But in this case, how will it fit in? But we are doing real time.
Yeah, you are doing real time, but the training phase is not there. It's
not
only
there.
The testing phase.
Okay.
Actually, huge time is expended for training the big network. Once the training is over, once you have got a trained t-tester, you can give any t-leads to him or her, and he or she can infer about that. That's it. So this is the future of machine learning, you know, all of you are working in data analytics, you should learn more about big data and deep learning. These areas are in their infancy, they are actually growing. So unfortunately, from India, there is very less number of representatives in these areas. So these are some references. If you see about the founders, Andrew Young is he's an associate prof at Stanford, then Baidu chief scientist, etc. Coursera, he's a co-founder of Coursera. Have you heard of Coursera?
Yes.
Yeah. So Coursera, the queries and the question answering techniques inside are all based on deep neural networks. Similarly, the YouTube video by, you can look at this YouTube video by Professor Geoffrey Hinton, who is a great mind. And I don't understand why from India people are not coming. We are trying to do something, but other youngsters and other good research-minded people should come forward for enriching this field. You know, I mean, already Dr. Kulkarni has stressed over the need of innovativeness inside young people, but at the same time, if you want to compete in global market, young people should come forward and engage themselves more into fundamental research. Interestingly, I will end up with one story that from whole India, whatever research has been done in computer science, globally 2 papers are most acclaimed. They say 2 big best works from India in computer science. They say means USA says. USA people says this, and the rest of the world just nods. I mean, Europe also nods to that, because as Sarah pointed out, so these 2 papers, interestingly, of these 2 papers, one paper was published in 2002, and that paper was by one professor and his 2 students who were at that time only undergraduate 3rd-year students. All of them were from IIT Kanpur, first thing. The professor was Professor Monindra Agrawal, and his students were Neeraj Kayal and Nitin Saxena. It is the AKS primality test paper. And this paper was from pure mathematical viewpoint. Later on, people found huge application in cryptography. The theme of the paper is, given a very big integer, you have to test whether it is a prime number or not in polynomial time. Prior to that paper, there was no algorithm known to do it guaranteedly in polynomial time. So name of the paper was Primes is in P. The paper was published in the Annals of Mathematics journal, which is the best journal in mathematics. Immediately after publication of that paper, that result was so much important, there was another huge article in the New York Times. Then the authors immediately got the Gödel Prize, Fulkerson Prize, etc. And now, recently, 2 years back, Professor Agrawal has got Padma Shri and so on. His 2 students, one is now with Microsoft Research, Neeraj, and Nitin is probably a professor in IIT Kanpur. And the other paper, strangely, the other paper is also from IIT Kanpur. It was also authored by one professor and 3 undergraduate students who were youngsters at that time, 2nd or 3rd year. That paper is the most cited paper from India. Citation means when other researchers are mentioning in your work in their work, and the majority of citations are coming from outside India. So it's a good thing that something which was devised in India has been used worldwide. So that paper is the famous non-dominated sorting genetic algorithm 2, NSGA2 paper by Professor Kalyanmoy Dev and his 3 young undergraduate students. They were all with IIT Kanpur. That paper was published in IEEE Transactions on Evolutionary Calculation. So this shows, I am not telling you the story of the professors, I am telling you the story of the students. So this shows that the young minds who are not still biased can have the courage to take up new areas and lead the nation in fundamental research or innovativeness, whatever. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, may I please welcome Dr. Ashok Deshpande to honor us with memorabilia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Mr. Anindra Bose. Mr. Bose pursued his Bachelor and Master of Science from University of Delhi. Later, he pursued his Master of Business Administration from Symbiosis Institute of Management. He has served as editor in Innovator Isogen and Macmillan India Private Limited. Currently, he is publishing editor at Springer Nature. So, we are delighted by your presence. Now, I invite Dr. S.C. Satpathy, honor and judgment, Mr. Anindra Bose.
सब सचिन जी would have. Hierarchical focus story we developed. Shubhendra, Shubhendra focus story. We then developed hierarchical focus story.